with dinner.
Strap in, folks, because this one is going to get crazy. During the 90s, my life was very complex. I'm ashamed to admit that I was part of a satanic cult back then. Now, this story isn't about dissecting my former beliefs, or how I went about practicing my former religion. This is more of a cautionary tale about the unforeseen consequences of being a part of a cult. To be perfectly honest, I never really took Satanism seriously. At the time, I was just a confused young woman from a broken home, looking for a sense of belonging in all the wrong places. I was desperate to be a part of something, and I found a group of people with whom I seemed to connect with. If I had to say and do certain things to maintain these new friends, then so be it. That was my mindset back then. And as they say, hindsight is always 20/20. Anyways, it was the fall of 1994 when I met my first long-term boyfriend. His name was Seth. I met him at a mass gathering that took place in Portland, Oregon. We seemed to hit it off straight away. He and I had a lot of mutual friends, and it turned out that Seth only lived one town over from me in Northern California. Everyone seemed to be happy that we found each other. We started seeing each other on a regular basis after the event in Portland. For the first couple of years, Seth and I had a beautiful relationship. I'm not ashamed to say that those were some of the best days of my life. However, as time went on, Seth became more and more devoted to his religion. It consumed him. It got to the point where it began to put a strain on our relationship. To give you a better understanding of the hierarchy of our cult, the entire community was divided into sects. Some of these subgroups practiced Satanism differently from others, but we all had a common anchor. I hope that makes sense. Seth was an apprentice, you could say. His superior had fallen ill, and naturally this meant that Seth had to take on more responsibilities in his absence. I helped him the best I could, but it was around this time that I started to have a major lack of interest in Satanism. I would even go as far to say that I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But I was so handcuffed to it because I was so in love with Seth. So I kept my indifference to myself. I found myself faced with a very difficult reality. I would never be able to distance myself from this cult without losing Seth. I was forced to watch him become more and more obsessed with the cult as time went on. Halloween was a very special night for us. I would look forward to the holiday every year. Believe it or not, our particular sect did not require any ceremonies or worship on Halloween. We were free to venture and enjoy the spoils of the night, as we used to say. Seth and I would always spend the evening together and act like a normal couple for a change. However, on Halloween of 1999, everything would change. It would be the night that I left Satanism forever, but it came at a cost. Seth told me that he had something special planned for us that night. I was very nervous because I had planned on telling him, in so many words, that I was no longer interested in being a part of the cult and I wanted out, but that I also wanted him to join me so we could start a new life together. But Seth had other plans. We drove out to a secluded peak that overlooked a beach. It was one of those spots where couples would come and look up at the stars. He had taken me there before and would usually bring his guitar. We'd sit together on the beach and sing some old Elvis Presley songs. Seth was actually a very good guitar player and had an amazing singing voice. We got there at 10:30, and as soon as the car was parked, Seth turned off the engine and turned to me.
Rachel, do you love me?
Of course I do, Seth.
If I asked you to be a part of something, would you be?
What are you talking about, Seth?
I finally found a way that we can serve our Lord together for eternity, and I need you to promise me that you will take this journey with me.
Seth grabbed my arm and gripped it tightly.
Promise me, Rachel. Promise me.
I was immediately frightened. I'd never seen Seth act so erratic before. Okay, Seth, I promise. Please let me go. You're hurting me.
Please don't be like all the others. They lack conviction, unwilling to do what is necessary. Our Lord is not one of the light, but through the light, we can join him in darkness.
Seth then struck me hard in the face, causing my head to hit the passenger side window. I blacked out for a short while. When I came to, there was something that almost immediately snapped me out of my daze and set off every alarm bell in my head. The distinct smell of gasoline. As I looked back over to Seth, he was holding a red canister over his head and was dousing himself with gas. I looked down at my lap to see that he had already drenched me in the substance as well. As he set the canister down on the floorboard, he trembled his final words.
You promised me, Rachel. You promised me. I'll see you on the other side, my love.
He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter. What followed next was the most terrifying and intense moment of my life. It was like a scene straight out of a movie. Time itself seemed to slow down as Seth struck the spark wheel of the lighter. However, the lighter did not ignite. I quickly fumbled for the door handle and managed to open the car door. As I fell backward out of the vehicle, the last thing I remember seeing was the horrified look on Seth's face as he struck the lighter again. The instant the lighter ignited, the car was completely engulfed in flames. I scrambled to my feet and ran away from the burning car. I'll never forget Seth's haunting wails as he was burned alive. I have no memory of what happened next. I woke up in a hospital the next morning, surrounded by nurses and police. I'll spare you the details of the police investigation. It went about as you would expect. Satanic panic was still a thing in America back then, and although it died down significantly in 1999, I still got a lot of dirty looks from both the hospital staff and police officers when the word got out that I was part of a satanic cult. Speaking of which, no one from my sect came to see if I was all right. I had already decided to leave the cult at that point, but I couldn't help but to feel left down by my so-called friends. After I was released from the hospital, I returned to the house that Seth and I shared. It was only then that it finally hit me. The love of my life was gone. I spent the next couple of months crying myself to sleep. I was all alone. No one there to help me. Of course, I had to attend several follow-up interviews with detectives who were convinced that I had more to do with the death of my boyfriend than what I was claiming. Fortunately, they had no evidence to support their theory and the case was closed. I eventually reconnected with my mother. In the time that I had been gone, I discovered that my abusive, alcoholic father had died in a car crash in 1997, and my mother had turned her life around. I ended up moving back in with her and restarting my life. For a time, things were okay, all things considered. I was seeing a counselor, got a well-paying job, and was even starting to make new friends. Normal friends. Halloween eventually came back around, and for reasons that should be obvious to everyone listening, I was not in the celebratory mood. My mother had moved houses after my father passed away, and she now lived in a more secluded area that did not have any trick-or-treaters, which I was grateful for. When Halloween night came, I went to bed early because I had to be at work early the next day. To make sure I got a good night's rest, I took a sleeping pill and passed out around 8 o'clock. I woke suddenly, after a short time later, covered in a cold sweat. I remembered the room was unnaturally cold. In the glow of my nightlight, I could see my breath evaporate into the air as I exhaled. I looked over to the clock on the nightstand and saw that it was 10:30 p.m. A dreadful, nauseous feeling overcame me, as the events that happened exactly 1 year prior echoed in my mind. After a few moments, I gathered my wits and decided to go to the kitchen and grab a drink of water. When I reached over and turned on the lamp on the nightstand, I was confronted by something that would, yet again, change my life forever. Standing in the corner of my bedroom was a severely burnt man. Melted flesh dangled from his face as his body pulsated from his drawn, gaspy breaths. To this day, I'm still surprised that I didn't scream. Maybe I was in so much shock that I physically couldn't scream. The horrifying apparition glared at me with eyes that had no lids to them. After a few more exaggerated breaths, the thing finally spoke to me.
You promised me, Rachel. You promised me.
I only managed to stutter a single word before my own fear overcame me, and I fainted. Seth! I wish I could tell you that this story has a happy ending. It's been 21 years since that fateful Halloween night on the Peak, and ever since, on every Halloween night, that same burnt man appears to me. Sometimes he's standing in the corner of my bedroom. Sometimes I see him under a streetlight as I drive past. Sometimes I see him in my rearview mirror, sitting in the backseat of my car. I'm still not entirely sure if this burnt man is the restless ghost of Seth or if it's all just in my head. I've seen many therapists over the years, and no matter how many drugs they prescribe me, the burnt man still comes back every year. After 20 years, I've learned how to live with it. I no longer allow it to traumatize me. However, there is still one thing that I've never been able to get used to. Whenever Seth returns, he always says the same thing. And every time I hear it, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
You promised me, Rachel.